Guys, welcome back to week 3. I think it's week 3 or 4 or 30, I don't know, of my Appalachian podcast about growing up in Appalachia. I hope that you guys are enjoying everything so far. I'm going to talk a little bit about road trips in Appalachia, making sure we've got thread in the bobbin there. And we are going to start putting together some squares. I've got some slightly larger ones over there as well. I may put those together before we're done, but not going to talk a whole lot about it. These are all 2.5-inch squares. I cut them from leftover pieces and I keep them in my bin until I'm ready to sew them, and then I just sew. So that's what we're doing today. So we're going to talk about road trips. Now, I know these days, for us especially, we live in Florida. We sometimes have to evacuate for hurricanes. And that road trip involves, restaurants and hotels and all kinds of stuff. When I was a kid, that's not how we did road trips. When we did road trips as a kid, number one, I was born in '66, so I don't even remember there being seatbelts in cars. I remember that we weren't allowed to jump around in the back seat, but there wasn't anything restraining us from doing it. So mom would say, "Oh, we're going on a road trip." And we always left at night when I was a kid. So you'd get your pillow, you'd get a blanket. You might have to share a blanket with your brothers, sisters, cousins, whoever was getting in the car. And they'd throw a cooler in the back, and that cooler had our drinks. And our drinks were water in a thermos, coffee, a milk jug full of water or tea if you were lucky, and some plastic cups, usually Tupperware or those metal ones that always made everything taste funny, taste like you had swallowed coins. Yeah, that was what we got to drink out of. And there was always a loaf of bread and some bologna. We didn't have other sandwich meat. I didn't know anything else existed except for bologna and deviled ham. And if you were taking deviled ham, it was in a little can, and there would be a bunch of those little cans. I've got one that's not cut apart here. And those cans were for the grown-ups. They weren't for the kids. The grown-ups would get mayonnaise smeared on their bread, and they'd get deviled ham and, whatever. The kids would get bologna. If you were lucky, you got it on 2 pieces of bread, but usually you got 1 piece of bologna on 1 piece of bread, and it was a fold-over sandwich. Y'all remember those? It wasn't cut in half. It was just peel the ring off of it, slap it on a piece of bread, hand it to you, and say, "There you go. That's your food." There wasn't any such thing as stopping at McDonald's or anything. I don't even remember if there were other fast food places. And I know for sure we never stopped at a restaurant. We would stop sometimes for the gas station. We'd get to go to the bathroom there. Sometimes when we'd stop, it would be along the side of the road or at a park. And they'd be like, "Y'all better go to the bathroom." Didn't matter if there was facilities there. And I remember there was a jug of water and there was always a bar of soap. I don't remember washing my hands with it, but I do remember that it existed. So that was road trips when I was a kid. And like I said, we usually left at night because the adults wanted us to sleep. And it was hot and uncomfortable. And of course, it was always, "He's touching me, she's touching me, she's laying on my side. She took my blanket, she stole my pillow." Every parent who's ever done a road trip without all these fancy dancy things definitely remembers that. And we played a lot of I Spy, certain license plates or trees or cows. Cows, everybody always moo moos, look, moo moos. It was fun. And then when I grew up, of course, we lived in Oklahoma. My mom was in Florida. So was my husband's parents. And then Granny and all of them were still up in Kentucky. So I came to Florida. My husband he went overseas for a duty, and he was going to be gone 6 months. And I had just had my youngest son, and my mom was like, "Oh, why don't you come down and visit while he's gone? You can close up your house and, come down here and stay." And they were going to do a couple of trips up to family in Kentucky. So I was like, okay. So I drove myself and two kids, a 4-year old and basically a newborn, to Florida. And even then, my southern upbringing, my frugal upbringing, I loaded up my cooler and the baby's blankets, and we slept at rest stops along the way. Go find us a back corner and park. And it was 20 hours, so I only had to sleep basically a few hours at a rest stop. It wasn't as big a deal back in 1990 as it is these days, because that was when my son was born. So we get to Florida. We're down there. My granny came to visit, and she was like, I don't know, 75, 80. No, she couldn't have been that old, 65 maybe. She came down to visit, and then she went back up to Kentucky. And about the time she got back up there, my mommy decided she wanted to go to Kentucky so she could see her sisters and brothers. And so we all loaded up all the cars and we headed to Kentucky. And my sister, who was very young at the time, she was like 15, was riding with me. And back then, I don't know if you guys have ever heard of Pound Mountain, but back then it was a twisty, windy, wrap around the mountain thing. I think they've since blasted through the mountain and straightened the road out. But I had a little Hyundai, this little bitty car, and we're driving up that mountain, and I'm terrified of heights. And my sister is in the passenger seat of my car, looking out the window of the passenger door, and going, "I can't see nothing but deep. I don't see any ground. I don't see the road." So here I am already shaking from driving across this thing, and my sister is making it 10 times worse. I finally threatened to open her door and push her out if she didn't shut up. So we finally get to my granny's, and I hadn't been back to Kentucky in quite some time. And I went to my granny's place. She was living by that point in not assisted, but a community where there was assistance available, but she still had her own apartment. And it was super crowded. I didn't realize that, all these people were staying with her. And then here's us. We get there and I'm like, "Oh, we'll go get a hotel room." My mommy's like, "Nope, we'll offend her if we do that." So we made pallets on the floor for my mommy, me, my kids, my sister. I think my brother went with us that time, my granny, and then all the people that were already still hanging out there. And then we all decided we were going to take a smaller trip. Sounds like a George Carlin skit, doesn't it? And we loaded up half the world in mine and my mom's cars, well over capacity for what they could carry. And we went down to my cousin Levon's, or my mom's cousin Levon's. I guess he's mine too, but second or third, I'm not sure. And here we all come rolling out of my little Hyundai, like 12 people we got in that car. Like, oh my God. We visited with Levon and Yvonne and his family and his son Ricky, who I'm still in contact with on Facebook. And we visited there for a couple of days. They didn't have electricity, if I remember right, or running water. So it was go out to the well, bring wood in for the fire, all that stuff. It was a nice visit. But the thing I remember most about it is they had a wooden bridge across the creek. And it's not creek, it's creek. This is a deep hole in the ground with about 5 feet of water. And there is a literal handmade wooden bridge across this thing. And it shook. And we had to walk over it. And here's me trying to act brave for my kids, thinking, oh my goodness, this is insane. So, but still, we ain't gone to a restaurant. We haven't gone to a hotel. Still got our cooler, still hauling it around, adding bread and sandwich meat regularly, and refilling the water or making more tea. That is the one thing everybody always had, was a way for you to make tea. So we're hauling this around, and then my sister starts getting ill. And that's when I found out that she was going to present me with a nephew. Take you, sis. I was like, okay. So then we're trying to find something that she can eat, but that's a road trip and a half. So we leave Levon's, we go back out to Granny's house, or Granny's apartment. Shouldn't have a house by that point. And my granny says, I got something for you. And I was like, oh, well, thank you. She made me a quilt. And I don't know if she thought that I had moved to Alaska or to the North Pole and was homeless. But this quilt, we call it the bulletproof. My ex-husband still has it. It is bendable like plywood is bendable. We folded this king-size quilt up, and the smallest it would fold was to the same size as my back seat of my car. And we ended up putting my baby's car seat on top of this thing, and my son on top of it when we drove back to Oklahoma. And I have never seen a quilt that is that heavy. My kids were perfectly warm in the back of that car the whole way back to Oklahoma. And my sister rode with me to Oklahoma. Thank you, sis. I appreciate it. And we didn't have to get any other source of heat. It was so hot in that car. I don't know if that quilt was what did it or what, but it was so hot. We got back to Oklahoma, and I put it on my bed, and I swear when you lay down under it, they talk about weighted blankets these days. Well, this thing was just like, it had to be the original weighted blanket. My ex got it because my son was staying with him, and they were in Michigan working, and they came home for a little bit around Christmas time, and my son asked if they could take that blanket with them to Michigan, because they were working in Michigan, living in a travel trailer, and the heat had gone out in the travel trailer. So of course I said yes. And let me tell you what, they took it to Michigan, and they said they didn't need heat after they put it in there. I'm sure they probably shared it. My son was like 15 or 16, working with his dad, learning a trade. But they said that thing kept them so warm they didn't even need to turn on the heat till they got out of bed. I was like, well, that makes sense. And he still has it. He still travels some for work, so that's perfectly fine. But that was the biggest quilt. And that thing, it's been all over at this point. So other road trips that we took, we went from Florida in 1991, so a year or two after Granny gave me that quilt, maybe 92. My grandpa passed during what they were calling at the time the storm of the century. And it was an ice storm that closed down roads from Georgia all the way through Kentucky. But we had to go up for the funeral. There was, that was one you couldn't miss. So we took off in my mommy's Saturn. Me, my mommy, my sister, and my sister's then boyfriend. And we drove up to Kentucky. We did the Sit with the Dead for 3 days. I will talk about that more at another time. But we sat with the dead for 3 days and we ate out of our cooler that we took with us. And someone helped at the church bring more food in, but basically everybody ate bologna sandwiches and either drank coffee or water for days, while we all sat with the body before it could be buried. And on our way back to Florida, we're still doing you don't get a hotel room, you don't go to a restaurant. I think we might have driven through McDonald's on that trip back. But my mommy was still in charge of the world. You know how that is. So we get to all the way back from driving up there through where they closed the highways and said travel at your own risk. Back to Florida, we get to Orlando and we get pulled over. And we get pulled over because our tag was obscured by all of the snow and dirt and rain that had accumulated, and our car looked like it had been through, I don't even know, everything. So they pulled us over and they're like, well, where are you coming from? What are you doing? My mom says, oh, we're coming back from a funeral in Kentucky. And no, we haven't stopped to wash the car. We've barely stopped to eat. And the guy's like, well, everybody's going to have to get out of the car and we're going to have to talk to you. And I know now that that was be nothing wrong with my driver's license. And thankfully there wasn't. But when he came back and he said, okay, your driver's license is good, I noticed his last name. And I asked him, I said, are you so-and-so's brother? And he looked at me funny and he said, how do you know him? And I said, I work downstairs from his office. Well, his brother was on the vice squad, and I worked at Public Works for the city. And so, yes, he was his brother, and they had an unusual last name, so it wasn't like I was telling anybody's secrets out of school. This is one of those names that there's two people in the world with it. That's about it. So he goes, well, your license is good, and I can't find anything wrong with you. So we're taking the guy who won't give us the right name to jail, but the rest of y'all can go home. He says, but you're driving. And he says that to me. And my mom said, my car's a stick shift. She can't drive it. And I looked at her and I said, oh, yes, I can. So I had to drive us home on that road trip. Thank goodness that I knew the guy that worked upstairs from me and remembered his last name. Because I think on that road trip, if I hadn't have, I think we might have all gone and got to spend the night in jail in Orlando. But and they did inspect our cooler in our car. They wanted to know why we were carrying bologna, and I think we had cucumbers or something in there, and mayonnaise, and jugs of water. And I was like, because we don't stop at restaurants. These days, I stop at restaurants. I don't carry a cooler. But that cooler saved us a couple times and caused us issues a couple of times. So, did you guys do road trips that way when you were a kid? I've seen pictures of the 1950s where people actually carried a picnic table and just stopped on the side of the interstate. We didn't do that, but it still was definitely different than how they do things these days. And you didn't eat in the car when I was a kid. You didn't eat in the car because that wasn't done and you might get bugs in there. So if you were going to eat, you stopped somewhere and you got out and you ate. But it might be on the side of the road. It might not be walking into a restaurant of any kind. And I can promise you, I had never been to a sit-down restaurant until we came to Florida. I didn't. I mean, I knew they existed, but I'd been in one maybe for breakfast with Grandpa, and that was about it. They weren't real common when I was a kid. definitely weren't real common. All right, so we got some more sewing done on our bin. I've got more squares to put together here. I've got more 4 patches, and I'm going to work those in with these other 4 patches that I have made along the way. And then we'll work it into the big quilt. And you guys are going to get to see the big quilt. It will probably be still a few weeks down the road, but it will happen. Thank you for listening. Y'all have a great day.